A day wasted on others is not wasted on oneself. This is one of the most famous quotes from Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens contributed to the English literature in the Victorian era in a way no one else did. The three factors which influenced English literature, society and language in the Victorian period the most were Queen Victoria, the Industrial Revolution and the Oxford Dictionary.
An important aspect of this period is the large-scale expansion of the British imperial power. By 1830, the British Empire had, of course, existed for centuries. Perhaps the most significant blow to its power occurred in the late 18th century with the successful revolt of its 13 American colonies, which would eventually result in the formation of the United States. During the 19th century, the British Empire expanded its power in many parts of Africa, in India, in the Middle East, and other parts of Asia. This process had many long-term effects, including the increased use of the English language outside of Europe and increased trade between Europe and distant regions. Perhaps the finest imperialist writer of the late 1800s and early 1900s was Rudyard Kipling. Kipling was the first English writer to be awarded for the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1907. Maybe the most important was the shift from a way of life based on ownership of land to a modern urban economy based on trade and manufacturing. By the beginning of the Victorian period, the Industrial Revolution had created economic and social changes, which included a mass migration of workers to industrial towns where they lived in new urban slums. An issue that was often debated about during that time was voting rights for women. These issues played important roles in Victorian literature describing political problems. During the Industrial Revolution, mass production was one of the factors to increase the number of goods and services reaching customers. Thanks to the improvement of the printing press, the output of books was doubled, with a capability of 1,500 impressions per hour. This had an enormous impact on how many books reached the audience or customers.
Nowadays, literature is for all social classes. Books are supposed to be read by all people, intelligent people, but also less intelligent people. But in the Victorian age, this wasn't the case. Books were mainly written for the middle class and upper class. This was caused by the low purchasing power of the lower class citizens. These lower class citizens were mainly workers in factories and miners. Because of the fact that books were primarily written for the upper class and the middle class, the level of English of the books was also higher. This is different from now, as literature is, normally, quite easy to read. Nevertheless, it's very manageable for us to read the books from the Victorian age. A quote from the Victorian novel Sherlock Holmes: "So alarming did the state of my finances become, that I soon realized that I must either leave the metropolis and rusticate somewhere in the country, or that I must make a complete alteration in my style of living." As you can see, there are a lot of complicated words used, such as rusticate and alteration.
During the Victorian age, female writers started to appear more and more. This occurred as a result of the ruling of Queen Victoria. An example of one of these women writers is Marianne Elliot. Although women did get chances to write books, they weren't taken too seriously. Marianne tried to avoid this by writing under a different name, George Eliot. She had a decent education until her 16th year, which contributed to the fact that she became a writer. Her style of writing was very different to most women writers in those times. She mainly wrote about the difficulties of living in a rural area. One of the most famous writers who lived in the Victorian age is Charles Dickens. In our time, still, probably everybody knows him, or has at least heard of him. Dickens is a very good example of the rise of the Industrial Revolution. As a kid, he had to work in the factories because his dad was imprisoned. Because he had to work in the factories, he could not go to school as a kid. Therefore, his writing was not extremely difficult. This enabled the little lower class people to read his books as well. Later on, of course, he became a rich person. He wrote a lot about the differences between rich and poor in those days. He could describe the differences very well because he had experienced both perspectives. Two of his most famous novels were Oliver Twist and The Christmas Carols.
If the milk in your cereal isn't pasteurized, you need to call an ambulance. To start off with, the three words in the sentence were newly made in the Victorian era. Which three words do you think? The first word is cereal, made up in 1832. The word originates from the French term céréales, which comes from the Latin language. The Latin word for cereal is made up out of two different words. The first word is cerealis, which means grain. Furthermore, the Greek god of agriculture was named Ceres. A combination of both makes cereal. So when a child asks for cereal, he indirectly mentions the name of the god of agriculture. The second word of the sentence, which was newly made in the Victorian era, was pasteurized, from 1881. The word comes from the name of the French microbiologist Louis Pasteur. Louis contributed to modern-day biology like no one else. How? He carried out numerous experiments involving bacteria and discovered the way microorganisms work. He experimented with milk and discovered that milk can be prevented to be contaminated by using his pasteurization method, killing harmful bacteria at a temperature high enough and not changing the molecules. This success in biology was very important for the Industrial Revolution, because new innovations led to better healthcare. The third and last word is ambulance, written in the Oxford Dictionary at 1809. This word also originates from the Latin language. The word consists of two rather funny words, hôpital ambulant. The definition of hôpital is a hospital, as you might have figured out, and the definition of ambulantum is the verb to walk. Combining these two words makes hôpital ambulant, which literally means walking hospital. The ambulance was new and needed a word to describe it. The word hospital from walking hospital vanished, so from the Victorian era until now, ambulance is used.
During the Victorian age, a lot of new genres started to develop. One of these genres is the Victorian governess novel. This genre is called after Queen Victoria. The books written in this genre talk about a governess who's ruling a country or an area in a certain way. In those times, a lot of debate was going on how countries should be ruled. A lot of people thought governesses were paid too much and they had too much power. Therefore, a lot of books started to appear about this subject because everybody wanted to express his or her opinion. One genre that came up in the Victorian age was the Bildungsroman. In this genre, there is a young person who goes through a development and eventually grows up to become an adult. In this development, the person is trying to find the meaning of life and start to change its way of life. One of the writers who really wrote this genre was Charles Dickens. He wrote a lot about poor children developing into a rich person. This was everybody's idea of the Industrial Revolution. People become rich as long as they wanted it. They could achieve everything they wanted.
A lot of poems were written during the Victorian age, especially about the Industrial Revolution. Here are two examples of poems written about the Industrial Revolution. Here's a poem against the Industrial Revolution. And did the countenance divine shine forth upon the clouded hills, and was Jerusalem builded here, among these dark satanic mills? This poem is clearly against the Industrial Revolution. The writer, William Blake, believes that it's a satanic activity and that the gods will not approve it. This is one of the oldest poems that portray the Industrial Revolution as human evil. Here's another poem about the life of the miners and the factory workers during the Industrial Revolution. I wander through each charted street, near where the charted Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of foe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. This poem is about the lower-class citizens in England, the miners and the factory workers. It's about the fact that they were sad, as it says, marks of weakness, marks of woe, in every cry of every man. This clearly indicates that all men that were working were sad. This poem was also written by William Blake.
Also, slang words are vanished from our current language use. One word is cat lap. Can you guess the definition? Something with a cat or a lap? No. It's a London slang term for a coffee or cup of tea. Another surprising word is meter. Meter has nothing to do with meat. Fortunately for the vegetarians. The definition of meter is a coward in non-Victorian slang language use. Another word group which has to be in our language is shaking a flenin. The slang term means to fight. However, fighting is never good. Good is taking the egg, which means winning. Louis Pasteur, for example. In 1895, Louis Pasteur took the egg with a Leeuwenhoek medal for his discoveries. To conclude, we are missing a lot of words from the Victorian language. From now on, when a barkeeper asks you if you want a cat lap, you know what to answer. How useful.